On October 5, 1813, a dense fog hung over the Thames River in southwestern Ontario, masking the tense confrontation that would unfold on its banks. In this quiet corner of the world, the future of North America would be shaped not by a treaty or diplomatic agreement, but by the clash of muskets, cannons, and the cries of soldiers on both sides. The Battle of the Thames was far more than a skirmish in the War of 1812. It was a defining moment that would change the relationship between two nations forever. It began with a campaign, driven by a desire for control over the contested borderlands of North America. For years, the United States had been locked in conflict with Great Britain, with the vast expanse of Canada becoming a pawn in the struggle for dominance. But in the fall of 1813, the Americans believed they had the upper hand. General William Henry Harrison, the future President of the United States, had carefully marshaled his forces, poised to strike the British and their indigenous allies. The stakes were high. The British, though facing the might of a rapidly expanding United States, had one of their greatest advantages. They were not alone. They had long-standing alliances with various Native American tribes, many of whom were fiercely loyal to the British cause. Tecumseh, the Shawnee leader, had been one of the most powerful figures in these alliances, uniting several tribes in a desperate bid to resist American expansion into their lands. But his destiny, and that of his people, was to be forever altered in a way no one could have predicted. As the battle began to unfold along the banks of the Thames River, the sound of gunfire echoed through the mist. British and Native American forces, led by the formidable Tecumseh, stood their ground against the advancing American troops. The battle was brief but brutal. General Harrison's forces quickly overwhelmed the defenders, and as the smoke cleared, it became apparent that the tide of the war had shifted. But it wasn't just the military defeat that would leave a lasting mark on U.S. Canada relations. It was the death of Tecumseh. The loss of the great Shawnee leader was a devastating blow to the British cause and to the indigenous resistance. Tecumseh had been the glue holding together the fractured alliances between Native American tribes and the British. Without him, the once formidable resistance crumbled. The consequences of the Battle of the Thames rippled far beyond the battlefield. For the United States, it was a victory, but not one without consequences. The loss of a powerful indigenous leader was a signal that America's expansionist ambitions would not be easily contained. As American settlers began to pour into the territories, they encountered the lingering tensions that would define U.S. Canada relations for decades to come. For Canada, the defeat at the Thames and the loss of its indigenous allies would have profound implications. While the British managed to hold on to Canada after the war, the landscape of North America was forever altered. The end of the War of 1812 and the subsequent peace treaty marked the beginning of a new era, one where the United States and Canada, two former enemies, would now face each other as neighbors, a dynamic that would set the tone for the next century. But what did this mean for the fledgling relationship between the two nations? The aftermath of the Battle of the Thames left a sense of uncertainty in its wake. Although the Treaty of Ghent officially ended the war, the tensions and mistrust that had built up during the conflict did not simply vanish. There was still much at stake: the status of Native American tribes, the fate of disputed territories, and the future of both nations' borders. The years following the battle were marked by a slow, uneasy peace. The United States and Canada remained locked in a rivalry, both nations unsure of what the future would bring. They were two nations, once bitter enemies, now destined to share a long border. But how would they coexist in the years to come? As time went on, the history of the Battle of the Thames was swept into the broader narrative of the War of 1812. It became one of the lesser-discussed battles, overshadowed by the more dramatic events of the war's conclusion. Yet the consequences of that battle were far-reaching. The legacy of Tecumseh's death and the collapse of his coalition would echo in the history of Native American resistance and U.S. expansion. But it also had a more subtle, though equally significant impact on U.S. Canada relations. Over the years, the two nations began to carve out a delicate, often contentious relationship. There were moments of cooperation, such as the border dispute settlements and the shared interest in trade, but there were also moments of tension, especially regarding the question of slavery, territorial expansion, and national identity. The Battle of the Thames and the events surrounding it left both countries with a lasting sense of their own destinies, shaped by conflict but still tied to one another in ways they couldn't quite predict. One of the most fascinating aspects of this history is how the battle's legacy played into the myth-making and identity-building of both nations. For Americans, the battle symbolized the triumph of a young nation asserting its power over its enemies. It was a moment of national pride, a testament to the strength of the U.S. military and its commitment to expansion. But for Canadians, the aftermath of the battle symbolized something more complex. The defeat at the Thames left Canada to reckon with its own relationship with both the British and the Indigenous peoples whose support had been so crucial. The Battle of the Thames also had a unique influence on the way the two nations would view each other in the years that followed. While Americans might have seen their victory as evidence of their superiority, Canadians had a different perspective. The loss of Indigenous allies, the deaths of key leaders like Tecumseh, and the retreat of the British all created a sense of vulnerability and insecurity in Canada. For years, Canada would look southward, uncertain of whether the United States would try to take advantage of their weakened position. Yet, remarkably, the tension between the two nations eventually gave way to cooperation. By the mid-19th century, both the United States and Canada had recognized the importance of maintaining a peaceful relationship. The line of the border, once a source of deep division, became a symbol of shared destiny. And though it wasn't a direct result of the Battle of the Thames, the events of that fateful day set the stage for a new era of diplomacy. In the decades that followed, the two countries would come to form what is now one of the longest undefended borders in the world, a remarkable testament to the evolving relationship between the U.S. and Canada. But it's important to remember that this peace wasn't a given. It was born from a turbulent history, a history that began on the banks of the Thames River, where lives were lost, futures were altered, and a new chapter in North American history began to unfold. The Battle of the Thames didn't just change the trajectory of U.S.-Canada relations. It set in motion a series of events that would shape the future of both nations, from their identities to their borders. And while the war is long over, the echoes of that battle are still felt today. A reminder of how one pivotal moment in history can alter the course of nations and the relationships that bind them.